This is my custom hybrid tank. It houses two distinctively different biomes. One terrestrial, which is home to my Leopard Gecko, and an aquatic, home to my colony of Blue Neon Guppies, shrimp and snails. For 24 hours, I set up my camera inside the tank, capturing everything that happens. The hunts, the hidden interactions, the quiet moments we'd normally never see, and what I discovered even surprised me. Let's get into it. In the early morning, before the lights come on, Coco, my leopard gecko, was out from his hide. It looks like he saw me set up my camera and is now just looking right into it, with a slight smile. Good morning, Coco. And after looking at the camera for a while, he decided it was time for the very first nap of the day. Not long after, the light started to turn on. And then the tank will completely transform in the light. The light would also slowly increase in intensity over the first 5 minutes, and slowly the light would also begin to penetrate the water surface on the aquatic side, as well as the top layer of floating plants. This was also the sign for the fish to wake up and to start their busy day ahead. And for the guppies, the sign of morning light, along with my presence on the other side of the glass, could only mean one thing: food. The guppies all began to swarm at the top of the water, competing with one another to get the best spot to catch the incoming flakes of food. But they would have to wait a little while longer before getting their first meal of the day. At the bottom of the tank, in the decorative sand, members of the Blue Dream Neocaridina colony were, as always, busy with looking for excess food or other organisms to eat. Neocaridina typically feed off of biofilm, which grows on surfaces like rocks and plants, but seems to thrive much more on growing on driftwood above all. But I have no driftwood in this tank, so luckily there are still plenty of other places they can go look for their food. These ones, for example, are feeding on top of the leaves of the Bucephalandra kitagang, as well as the Schismatoglossus prietoi in the back. And these two seems to be in the middle of a very important conversation, while a juvenile guppy is harassing their cousins behind them. I recently tried another experiment with gluing some of the Rekia to this rock right here. Unfortunately, that didn't quite take off, and in the future I think I'll just glue some moss to it instead, because that seems to work. And moving on from the aquatic biome into the terrestrial, not much have happened thus far. Our friendly apex predator is sound asleep in his hot hide and seems to be enjoying his nap. Throughout the night, Coco have left a present for some of the newer and more unintentionally added inhabitants. This small baby mealworm was busy with making use of Coco's waste. This particular mealworm is actually a native inhabitant of the ecosystem. You see, a couple months ago, some of the mealworms I fed him must have burrowed underground, developed into their pupae stage and then ultimately the beetle form, and then actually bred with one another, resulting in a brand new generation of mealworms being born inside the enclosure. When it decided it had had enough, it quickly made its way for safety by going underneath this piece of slate. I have also recently added this long branch of the Crassula ovata succulent plant near the background of the enclosure. I felt that the tank could use some more greenery towards the back, and in order to help the plant thrive and develop roots, I decided to add some water and some moisture to the cool side where the plants are. I also watered the plants at the front of the enclosure. After watering, a now very wet and still uneaten mealworm started gunning for safety behind the background of the enclosure, where it knew it would be safe from both predators and weather. Moving back into the aquarium side, patience for the guppies was about to be paid off. I sprinkled in the food and watched along as the competition for food began to unfold. And also, interestingly, I observed that the bigger guppies would flock at the surface, battling for the bigger pieces of food, while the smaller and younger guppies would often stay lower in the water column, catching the food that did not get eaten at the surface. They knew not to pick the fight with the bigger fish, or else they themselves could get eaten. And of course, the last two remaining neon tetras is also very much active in getting the food. After a while, there was no food left, and that left this male hungry for something else entirely. I guess this means that the mission failed. At the top of the surface, another story was unfolding. This shrimp was eating biofilm from the surface of the water while hanging onto the floating plants. This enables it to stay safe from the fish by hiding deep in a bush of Riccia, while also getting access to the easiest source of biofilm, floating at the water's surface. In fact, this is a popular practice among the shrimp in the aquatic biome. This one is doing the same, but hiding in amongst the crowns of the Rotala bloodred instead, before jumping onto the floating ball of Riccia besides it. This gold pothos has also undergone some pretty big changes. It is starting to grow into the terrarium side, and it's also sprouting new underwater roots as well. Moving back into the terrarium, Koko is no longer asleep, but instead he's sitting in the corner of his hide looking out at the terrain. Suddenly, some large worms appeared out of absolutely nowhere. At first, he didn't seem to notice them, but when the second appeared, he caught sight of him. More appeared and some of them got eaten, while some actually managed to escape into the nearest crevice. Then he just stood and stared at me rather than look down at the ones right in front of him. He could still smell that there were prey around him, but he didn't quite know where to look. He sniffed around for a bit, and then he saw movement in the crevice where the two worms were hiding. He stood and looked, wondering how he was going to reach them in there. But then he heard movement somewhere else. A mealworm was climbing the background and Koko saw it. He edged in closer, adjusted his stance, and leaped. And he caught it. He then looked quite happily at the camera after his successful hunt through a small opening between the driftwood. But it seems he had now completely forgotten about the worms stuck in the small crevice as he crawled back towards his cave. But instead of taking another nap, he decided to come say hi to the viewers and give them an important message. Less than 1% of people who watch the videos are subscribed to the channel. If you're enjoying the content and wish to support the channel, consider subscribing, it's free! Thank you, Coco, for those wise and insightful words. Now with that out the way, I ultimately decided to help Coco out with getting the stuck worm. He was by no means pleased as he quickly turned around to hide. But after a bit of trying, I got the worm out and I put it in front of Coco's worm hide. He thanked me for the kind assist and quickly snatched it up. All the while another tiny mealworm had come to play the part of decomposers in the ecosystem. After his hunt, Koko decided he wanted to retreat back into his hut hide for a well-deserved nap. But little did he know, there were hardly any time for napping already. I placed the container of grasshoppers and crickets inside his enclosure and removed the lid. Immediately the grasshoppers left the container and began exploring the terrarium. One of the grasshoppers immediately went to check out the nearest cave, but Koko saw it at the entrance and was intrigued. The grasshopper ultimately went back into a smaller gap between the hide and the background where Koko couldn't quite reach it. While being completely oblivious to the grasshopper right in front of him. The crickets were much more careful. They were all still inside the container, seemingly a bit scared of the open world beyond the small plastic box. One had made its way onto the bridge, but took her time before making a decision. All while a grasshopper stood to observe them. Koko had now seen the other grasshopper and gave it a good sniff, as well as a quick taste test. The grasshopper can consider itself lucky to have escaped alive, although it lost one of its hind legs. Koko, on the other hand, looked confused as to how it did not catch the prey. And then he saw the crickets in the container. He stood and watched them, and then looked up at me. What do you think he was trying to say to me? This cricket stood on top of the bridge and looked down at Coco. This was actually the same cricket as before, and she still looked equally as perplexed as to what she should do. Should she go back in the group in the container and live in the same way she always had? Or should she take a chance, wander into the wilderness and search for happiness and a new life? The choice was not easy. Ultimately, she decided to take the chance and stepped onto the nearby piece of driftwood. One of her friends then climbed onto the underside of the bridge, questioning whether or not to make the same bold move. The grasshoppers found safety at the top of the enclosure where Coco did not venture. The lucky escapist tried yet another bold move looking for safety. It went over to the big jade plant and climbed onto the background, trying to climb out of the enclosure. But ultimately he fell down and instead went for a drink with another one of his buddies at ground level. After the drink, the two-legged grasshopper looked energized as it bounced around the enclosure's ground. He then made the grave error of crawling into Coco's den. This time, he made sure he didn't miss. One grasshopper down. Having just watched his mate getting eaten, this grasshopper decided to hide on the underside of this jade plant before building up the courage to go back out in the open. All while Coco could watch from his hide. The brave cricket crawled down the side of Coco's hide, while the last remaining crickets were still in the container. The cricket had also gotten thirsty and it decided to visit Coco's water dish for a quick drink. Meanwhile, the injured grasshopper was crawling on the background and Coco came out to have a closer look. And safety. The grasshopper had found its way back to the top of the terrarium and down by the ground, the other grasshopper was crawling upside down on the driftwood where Coco looked the other way. Coco then came out to check something out, not seeing the grasshopper suspended right above him. he saw a cricket on the slate. He stood and watched it, carefully. Then he missed. The cricket had jumped to safety and it then crawled inside Coco's hide from underneath it. But Coco saw it. The grasshopper from before had now decided to get down from its upside down position from the driftwood and went for a drink in the water dish. But it was being closely watched from behind the whole time. After getting its refreshing drink, it then headed for safety inside Coco's cool hide. And after this, Coco was not hungry anymore. He would be shedding his skin very soon, so it was natural for him to have a lowered appetite today. I caught out the remaining prey insects and put them back into their containers. Moving back into the aquarium, we were now approaching the last few hours of light of the day. I had recently changed the direction of outflow on my aquarium filter, and these guppies were enjoying testing their strength against the strong current that the outflow generates. These two snails were also venturing out of the water, eating small algae particles that had formed on the slate rocks. These snails could go out of water for brief periods, but would have to go down in the water again soon, as they cannot sustain themselves out of water for an extended period of time. And so, after 24 hours inside the hybrid tank, we've witnessed the rhythm of this little world. Coco stalking and hunting, guppies flashing through the water, shrimps and snails working tirelessly across every surface. Two biomes side by side, each alive in their own distinctive ways. Let me know, did you enjoy this style of video, and would you like to see me do more of these 24-hour looks inside my tanks and terrariums? Let me know in the comments, and please, if you're new to the channel and enjoyed the content, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.